Hello, Sophie D'Souza here, Sophie Stained Glass. Thank you for joining me. If this is your first time, you're very welcome. Please check out all my videos, so many. And if you're returning, I thank you for your support. Hopefully I've answered most questions you might have about architectural stained glass. But I have had one from a very lovely subscriber. I think you know who you are. I did enjoy my flowers. Asking about kiln work. So, as you know, if you've seen my videos, I do traditional leaded work, which involves sometimes painting. So this isn't really a video for people who do warm glass. I'm no expert on that. I do fused work, but it's a small part of my practice. So I would not like to set myself up as an expert in that. So when you paint on glass, you have to heat the glass to fuse the paint to the surface. You only want to heat it so that the surface begins to melt. So you're going to a much lower temperature than you would with fused work. Now, everybody has their preferred temperature. I like to take it up to 666. I wonder why. But some people take it to 670, some people take it to 660. For some reason, 666 sticks in my brain. And that will give me a nice polish finish. If you heat your painted work to a slightly lower temperature, you will get a duller finish. So it depends what you're looking for, really. You can fire your glass as many times as possible. So it's very normal when you're doing painted work to have several firings. You might do the trace work for one firing, then go back to it and do the shading work. And having done your painted work at this temperature, you might go back and paint it with enamels, which fire at 550. Always do your highest firings first. You can figure that out, right? So silver stain also slightly lower temperature, so you would do that after your glass paint. If you've got something that's rather large or rather precious, maybe you're on your fourth firing and you don't want to risk it breaking, you do a more gentle, slower firing. That's to say, you don't just whack it up to full temperature, rest it for 5 minutes, and then just let it cool. You would ramp it at a controlled rate. That means, let me find out what I actually ramp it at. So at this point, I think it might be useful if I just rewind a bit and go back to basics of kilns. So an oven in your house, you turn it on and it gets to temperature as quickly as possible. You can sometimes set a timer. 20 minutes later it'll go ping and you turn it off. You can open the door and it'll cool down. Keep the door closed and it'll keep the food warm for a bit longer. So with a kiln, it's a bit different. You have to tell the kiln the rate at which you want it to heat up. Now it might be that you want it to heat up as quickly as possible, and that is called the ramp rate, by the way. And that's I find it really difficult sometimes to talk without my hands. Ramps, by the way, can go up and down, and I'll get to that later. So your kiln will either want to know how many degrees per hour you want it to increase. So you might set it at 200 ramp rate, and that would be 200 degrees an hour. Other kilns say, how long do you want it to take to get to 600 degrees, say? So you might have to put not a temperature in, but you might have to put 5 hours in, and it will calculate the speed at which it ramps up, and it will turn off and on and off and on and off and on with the thermostat inside the kiln until it gets to the temperature you've programmed. Once you've got to that temperature, the next bit of your recipe, should we call it, is the rest period. So you've got it to 600 and you want it to rest for half an hour. So you put in half an hour and it just stays steady at that temperature for half an hour. Then usually you'll have another ramp rate, probably faster, maybe full, to top temperature, and that might be 850, it might be 700, whatever it is for what you're making. And again, there'll be another hold or rest period, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. The longer you rest it, the more it cooks, like with your oven at home. Then you have to control, usually, not always, but you can control the rate at which it cools down, which you can't do on a domestic oven, obviously. And again, we're talking ramps, and you need to tell your kiln the speed at which you want it to cool down, and that might be temperature, so it might be degrees per hour, or it might be how many hours do you want it to take to get to the next temperature. So you have to program both those bits in. What's the temperature you want it to get to, and how long do you want it to take to get there? Again, you might have a rest period then. Then you might want to carry on what I would call a full ramp, so as fast as possible, because usually there's temperatures around the coefficient of expansion that you need to take the time with. Once you've done that, you can relax a bit, and your manufacturer will tell you that. So then you ramp it down, and I tend to ramp it to 20. If you are only doing a small piece of glass and it's not going to crack, you can just turn your kiln off at that point and sort of program it to end, and then it will just cool down naturally. And because it's a very well insulated box, it will take quite a long time to cool down, and that will of course depend on the size of your kiln and its insulation. You can speed up the cooling process by propping the kiln open, but I wouldn't suggest doing that till you've got below 100 degrees. I'm in centigrades, by the way, British. So, sorry, you'll have to do those conversions. I'd have to dig very deep to cope with Fahrenheit. So you can prop the kiln open. I tend to only prop it open when I've got to 70 degrees. You can, if you have asbestos fingers, take the glass out at about 50 degrees, but not if it's big. If it's big, you are risking it breaking. But quite often we're only painting small pieces. My big kiln has 9 different steps it will allow you to program in each program. And it has about 30 memories of programs. My hobby kiln, each program only allows 4 steps. So you have to get a bit clever about how you program it to only have 4 steps. So that's why at the end with my small kiln, I tend to just turn it off, because I've done ramp rate to temperature number 1 is 1 step. Ramp rate to temperature number 2 is another step. Holding, another step. Turn it off, another step. So these are the recipes I use for my hobby kiln. Segment 1 of 4 segments is a ramp at 222 degrees till I get to 677 degrees, and I hold for 30. That's segment 1. Segment 2 is a ramp rate up at 333 degrees per hour to 804, where I hold for 10 minutes. Segment 3 is full ramp, which in this kiln is 999, down to 482 degrees, and then I hold for 30 minutes. Segment 4 is a ramp of 83 degrees to a temperature of 307 with no hold. And I only have 4 segments per recipe, which means at that point my kiln turns off, and from there on it just cools naturally. So it's quite a lot to get your head around when you first start using it. Just remember, it differs from your oven at home because you need to tell it the rate at which you want it to increase and decrease temperature, and you can also program it to hold at that temperature for a period of time. So I hope that makes sense. Now back to the rest of the video. So this is the firing schedule recommended by Williams and Burn. It's full ramp to your top temperature, so 560 for enamel or 666 or what have you for paint. Hold 5 minutes and then ramp down at 200 degrees, so control the cooling. People talk about a coefficient of expansion, a COE, when they're talking about glass. And what they mean is there is a temperature, and it's to do with the manufacturer, and the manufacturers can tell you the COE temperature at which it is fragile, under the most tension, and needs to rest. It's like the molecules are going mad, they're all moving about, and you need to give them time to settle. And if you don't, you risk the glass breaking. There's a much smaller risk if you haven't taken it up to a high temperature of 800 and something. Because if you're only melting the surface of the glass, not as many of those little molecules are jumping about. There's not as much movement. Sorry, I am clearly not a chemist. And so you don't have to be as worried with glass paint. But if you're doing fuse work, that's what you need to check out. So the different glasses out there like Bullseye or Spectrum have different COEs, so you need to find out what's required by your glass. There are various recipes you can follow, so I've given you the Williams and Burn gentle recipe, although I think I may have slightly condensed that. I have another slow paint, I'm just reading it off to the side here, that I do in my small kiln. 4 segments, 100 degrees ramp rate to 650 or 670, whatever you're doing, and rest for 45 minutes. Second segment is full down to 516, where you rest it for another 45 minutes. Then the third segment is a ramp of 65, so really slow, down to 371, no rest at that point. And the fourth is 65 to 50, and actually I've just realised that makes no sense. If there's no rest at 371, you could just ramp it straight down to 50. Obviously, brain not firing on all cylinders when I wrote that one down. But it's always worked, so let's not worry about that. What else can I tell you about kiln work? What do you put on your kiln shelf? You can't put your glass directly onto your kiln shelf. It will stick. I like to use this. It's kiln paper. It turns to dust when it's fired. And if you put one of these sheets on your kiln shelf every time you fire, in the end you'll get a nice thick layer of kind of dust. And then you don't have to keep using this. Your glass can sit directly on the dust. It will get contaminated, especially if you're using silver stain, because you fire silver stain the other way up. So you fire it with the silver stain facing down. So that will turn everything else that touches it yellow after you've fired that in your kiln. But yeah, I quite like this. I buy an entire roll, which is quite expensive, but then I've always got it. I've got a big kiln, so I need quite a lot of this stuff. What else can I tell you about firing and kilns? So kilns have vents in them. I will show you the vents in my kiln in a sec. And that's to let the fumes out while it's firing. I tend to fire with them open because I think it just gives a gentler fire. That's just what's going on in my head. I don't know if it's true, but it does let the fumes out. Keep a record of all your firings. That's what this is. I used to do a lot of firing in the past, and a lot of experimenting with fusing and all sorts of things, and I destroyed all my notes by leaving them on the kiln. So they had turned to ashes when I returned. Don't do that, please. Don't try that at home. But it was very sad and a little bit dangerous, clearly, because you do have to keep meticulous notes when you're firing of all your temperatures and ramps. It's all a bit fastidious, really. But there's no way around it, really. I'm trying to think. I'm going to go away and have another think and come back if I can think of something else.